Thank you for being here with me. And I'll talk about the performance of Magento for the long-term profitability, or basically what you can do with the platform. Now, I tend to speak very fast in English, so if you see me like picking up the pace during my talk, just show me the time sign, and we will be fine. So,
can we throw stuff?
No. Well, maybe you can, but no. So, I'm Jakub Winkler. I'm the CEO and founder of Coliber. Well, Coliber is a new brand that I established last year because I decided I need a shorter name for the company. So it's Coliber. We are Whova Gold partners, Elastic Suite Gold partner, and one of the 3 Magento Association Platinum partners. So we do a lot of stuff for the open source as well. I wrote a small book about mastering Adobe Commerce or Magento frontend. It's about optimizing Luma theme, how to work with it. There are hundreds of thousands of Magento stores which still suffer with bad code. So this book actually shows how to do it. But I think that this is Meet Magento, so all the best developers and agencies are here. So just maybe as a curiosity and just showing this. So let's just start. What's the plan of this talk? So I'm going to show you some default numbers of Magento. I will explain to you what optimization is in my point of view, and why and how to optimize the backend performance, why optimize front-end performance. Again, I will show you the numbers based on our latest 2 years working with Magento and optimizing Magento stores. And I'll also explain to you what is a full store optimization and how much money you can actually save a year running Magento. So let's start. The first number is 7%, and that's basically the conversion lost if your page loads additional 1 second. So for every 1 second waiting for the page load, you lost sales. You're losing customers, and basically your store sales are plummeting. And on the mobile devices, it's even much worse. Because on every second page load, we are using 20% of conversion rates. So if your page loads around 3-4 seconds, and trust me, that's not uncommon in Magento ecosystem, unfortunately, then you are basically losing most of the sales you can get. Because on the mobile device, people want to shop fast. They want to make sure that they can purchase something. And even recently, you need to have things like Apple Pay or Google Pay, because most of the people on the mobile devices are like impulse shoppers. And if they cannot buy something like just right away, just click that button to use the Apple Pay or Google Pay, you are losing conversion rates. And the latest trends actually shows that over 60% of the global traffic is on the mobile devices, and the traffic is just increasing. So the more time will pass, the more people will be buying on the mobile devices. So if you are not optimized for Magento store or any e-commerce site, because Magento is not the only platform which suffers performance. I've seen WooCommerce, which is loading 10 seconds. I've seen PrestaShop, which was loading over 20 seconds. Even Shopware, which was loading over 5 seconds. And Magento, which was overloading 3 minutes. It's possible. But to be fair, 2 minutes and 50 seconds was a response from a third-party system. But there was a bad integration. I will talk about how this integration should be handled to make sure that Magento is fast and working really nicely. So based on those numbers that you just saw, it's easy to say that slow e-commerce kills your sales, and slow e-commerce costs you more to maintain. Because basically, you cannot focus on what business needs. You just focus on things that you want your website just to run. You just want your website doesn't crash. I had multiple conversations with the merchants from the project we inherited from the market, basically, asking me if when they start a new marketing campaign which brings traffic to their website, if the website will crash, because that kept happening in the last couple months. And even in Magento 1 days, we saw a lot of bad code and a bad optimized most. So basically, to put it very simply, this is a different font that I use, but it still fits. So the performance optimized e-commerce in 2025, and the more time will pass for the mobile devices, it's not a nice to have feature as it was like a couple years ago. It was like, oh, my Magento loads under 1 second. It is good time, but on the basically web development, 1 second it's still like a very long time. So it's not a nice to have. It's an absolutely must-have feature, must-have for your Magento store. So what is the performance optimization? I will not read this slide because I don't like to do stuff. Basically, it's making sure, in my own words, it's basically making sure that you're using as much as the tools you have to their full potential. So it doesn't matter if it's a front end, it's a back end, you're just utilizing the usage of the tools to their full potential without any bottlenecks to make sure that things run fast, things run smooth. So basically, it's deep diving into the code. So before we do that, and I'll try to be as less technical as possible, let me just ask you a question. How many of you have a technical background? All right, so most of you guys. So yeah, we can get a little bit technical. So why you need to performance? Again, I don't want to read that. Performance optimized site basically doesn't cause any problems. It makes your website run fast. It makes you, it gives you less of a headaches. And as a business owner or your merchant or your partners that you work with, they can focus on really what matters for the e-commerce industry, for their business, for their website. So they don't have to bother calling somebody or looking for somebody who talk to call just to make sure that the website is running or it's not crashing. And it has to be both fast on the backend, so the server needs to respond fast. Your website should render really fast, and I'll show you some numbers how fast you can actually get Magento with some default settings, just tuning up. But it also needs to be very responsive on the front end. And I've also added that. Oh, it's not on that slide, sorry. So basically, it needs to be both fast on the back end to respond and fast for the user when they're browsing the website. So you don't have to wait for the JavaScript just to process initializing hundreds of files as it does basically on any default Magento theme that is based on Luma. So let's play a game. How much money can you think can be saved each year on an optimized site? 1,000 euros? 10,000, 25 more? Well, it depends, as it's, as it's on the bottom right corner, because it depends on the scale of your business, it depends on how much extensions you have, it depends on how many customizations have been done to your store, what sort of teams you are running, and how many Magento instances or how many Magento stores are running on the same instance that you are, currently have. I will show you, by the end of this talk, I'll show you the number, really big one, how much money we saved a year on a full store optimization. Trust me, with the 25,000 euros, you can simply save on hosting if your Magento is optimized. So that's, I don't know, that sounds like this money could be put into marketing, maybe hiring somebody, doing some advertising. So this money could be put in much better use than just paying for the, making sure that Magento just doesn't crash under heavy load. So what's the backend optimization? Very simple, that's the term you probably all know. Time to first byte. So we just wait, optimize how fast our server responds to render Magento website. It can be a product page, category page, home page, any page that should be later cached, right, in Varnish. So we got Varnish on the in the house. So make sure that you join his talk, because he will talk about some amazing stuff you can do with Varnish for Magento. So time to first byte. So this is the website. My company and I, we did it a couple of years ago. It was loading 0.6 seconds. Right now, the project was inherited by another agency, a little cheaper than Colliber, but the page, average category page load is 15 seconds. Every product page load is 20 seconds. So not very well. And if you not have a technical background, this is the thing you can actually check in the Chrome browser or in any Chrome-related browser just by enabling developer setting and see how much time it needs for the server to render. So 15 seconds, it's not bad. Trust me, I've seen much worse. But this website, I will not show you which one is it, because I like, because of the NDA and all the other stuff, but it loads 16 seconds, and it just keeps getting worse and worse, because they're adding a lot of customization to the website, but they're not thinking how to optimize the performance of the additional data load. And that's the biggest problem. So what's the backend optimization in practice? And the problem is that my talk is only 25 minutes, and this whole thing is a week training for developers. So I'm just like covering the surface, scratching the surface of what can be done here. So as a developer, as a backend developer, you reduce the number of database queries, you optimize slow database queries, you add necessary indexes to some columns on the database, and trust me, it actually can speed things up a lot. The thing that is actually very interesting is moving some very consuming process to the asynchronous queues in the background. So I've seen countless extensions on the market and a countless integration that try to communicate with third-party systems during the checkout process. And if the third-party system goes down, so does the checkout process. And I've seen multiple times scenarios where basically the website is crashing because of the bad integration. And the truth is that all those processes could have been easily moved to the background to be processed after the order is processed, not affecting the front-end performance of that application And yeah, and also you need to optimize some of the PHP code. So if you have like a nested loops, like for each, for each, for each, for each, and Magento has a lot of those. And one of my favorites is like RI merge recursive or RI merge in the for each loop. You need to optimize how to use it to avoid those nested loop, because you can do some small PHP optimization as well, but mostly we're talking about database optimization and maybe some server tuning, and it starts with profiling. So let me ask you before we start digging into this, how many of you profile your pages using tools like Blackfire? So some of you guys. So Blackfire and Tideways are paid solutions. I myself use Blackfire. I know that some developers prefer to use Tideways, but there's also a free alternative, Backgregator, I think that's the way you pronounce it. You can also run it on your own server, host it, and it will give you the same flame graph, give you same detailed information, how things process in the code, how things take to load. So let's look at some examples of the pages we had. And like I said, I'm using Blackfire, and this is an example of a page. A merchant came to us and says, hey, Jakub, our page loads 12 seconds. Can you see what's wrong? I say, okay, let's just install Blackfire and see what's actually going on there. And we could actually see that there's some input-output process that takes 6.7 seconds, and the CPU usage time is for 5.23 seconds. So we need to see what the first number was actually about, and it turned out it was a very simple thing. It was a Redis session mechanism on a production website causing basically 6-second additional load. So it's impossible to check it, just by refreshing the page. You need tools like that to make sure that you can determine those things. And just by changing the configuration in env.php file, just to disable locking on a Redis session, this website got 50% faster. Obviously, we did a lot of more than that for that project, but that was like the main bottleneck. The rest were extensions that came with the third-party themes, right? Like hundreds and thousands of database queries. So let's look at some other examples. And if your website or your merchant website or partner website is still based on Luma, and unfortunately on a third-party theme, I don't want to name them, but we all know them. This is one of the most popular themes. And you can see, I don't want to. It's recorded, so I don't know where it's going to be. So just to render the mega menu, it was actually doing the whole page request. All the database queries took 1 second. So just the communication with the database to get data and render it, 2,406 database queries. It was taking 1 second. And you can actually see that 1,300, let's say, close to it, was just queries to the database to render the mega menu. And it just keeps getting worse, but I don't want to get into details. But if you're on a third-party theme and your website really loads very, very long, and for me it's above 2 seconds, it means you need to start profiling and see what's wrong with the code and looking basically in the engine, as I say to my merchants. And let me just show you some 3 other projects that also we needed to profile. So the first one was very interesting because it was a very large enterprise project for a company of the top 500 in the United States. And they had their own internal team, which was doing a lot of third-party and customized application that communicated with Adobe Commerce in this instance. And every single page request to render a page was taking 2 minutes. Every single page refresh, 2 minutes. So they hired me to see what's wrong, because the development team couldn't get anything across to their development team. And I said, hey, we need to profile and see what's wrong. And you can actually see that some HTTP requests from those 2 minutes, actually from those 2 minutes, 7 seconds to render the page, was taking 2 minutes and 4 seconds. And then we have one more interesting project, another third-party theme, 2,000 database queries, and another very heavily customized project by a company that lives very, very far away. Almost 10,000 database queries. Okay, it's 8,200, but to render a product page, it was getting to 10,000. And just 2 seconds, just to communicate with database to render the data. Obviously, such a page, any of those projects will be impossible to index by Google, impossible to browse by the customers, basically, and the merchants will blame Magento. Magento is slow, Magento is bad, Magento is expensive, just because they don't know anything. Just because agencies blame Magento as a platform because the platform is slow. Probably you heard it multiple times. The platform is, well, could be faster, let's be honest, because this is the biggest open source platform there is, hundreds of thousands of files. So obviously it takes time to load, but those numbers, those times, it's not something that we should see in our Magento world. So let's break it down. Once you start profiling the page, you will be presented something with a flame graph, which basically shows you like the composition, how many things, how things are affecting the page load. And with the Blackfire, the orange stuff actually, Blackfire basically tells you this should be optimized. And if you start looking at those graphs, starting learning how to read them, in this example at the bottom right corner, you can see that things kind of repeat themselves. So on the code level, it means that the same database query is being performed multiple times. So the simple solution is just to do one database query and optimize the data load or show based on a PHP code, because PHP is faster than MySQL query. And this was actually very interesting because that was a product page, there was some slider, 200 database queries just to render that slider. That's the request to the third-party system I just told you in this enterprise project. With the Blackfire, we were able to identify the actual communication to the third-party application was taking 2 minutes. And then when we showed this to that corporate entity, they were like, okay, we think Jakub is right. But it took a couple of weeks for them to actually do something about it because, you know, the larger the client, the longer the process. So that's why after that project, I don't work with enterprise clients, sorry. And that's the most interesting part, a third-party extension, very heavily customized product grid, and a very heavily customized product page showing very like sophisticated product data based on other products and so on. And what I want you to focus here is not this decomposition graph with a lot of hundreds of small calls, but see how many times a plugin is called. So the more plugins you have in Magento, the more modules you have, the more things you have in your code, Magento will try to get next plugin to render. So in this project, it's actually because of there are so many customization done, 3 million calls just to get, so even if a database, even if it takes like a nanosecond, 3 million calls will eventually wrap 2-3 seconds just to do something. And for that, for the get next plugin, I didn't put it on my slides, but check out the Creativity Interceptor plugin on GitHub. It's a plugin developed by a company in the United States that changes the way the interceptor are created. So, and it's called the plugins in a sequential order. They are defined in the XML file. The problem is there's a bug in that plugin, so that's why it's not official and not everybody is using it, because it doesn't look for the scope of a plugin. So if the plugin is enabled on a global instance and disabled on the front end, it will still work on the front end. But knowing that, you can use that and just get rid of those 3-second page load by an open source extension developed by somebody else. So I recommend to using that. And yeah, so get profiling, get sure that you know the database. So what should be the desired results? So this is what we do at Coliber. Uncached pages for the product pages is around 420 milliseconds. That's like an average. It's still a long time, to be honest. It should be around 120, 150 milliseconds, but it has to do with Magento architecture, how there are some recursive function in the dependency injection work on the inside, so it will take somebody very, very smart to fix it. Maybe we'll ask Ivan to do it, and also invite you to join his call. And for the category page, we try to be lower than 500 milliseconds. And with the Blackfire profiling tool, you can actually see how much time you saved, how less resources you are consuming, you're rendering your page, how less CPU time is needed, and that's the way to do it. So you need to start profiling, start looking at the code, because if you're not running your Magento website yourself, but you're working for the merchants, for agencies, for your clients, make sure that their websites are fast. Because I don't know how it is in France, but in Poland, Magento has a very bad reputation for being very slow and very expensive, because the more they customize the platform, the slower it becomes. And it's because people don't pay attention to the performance optimization. They don't look if their work actually jeopardizes the way Magento works. So that's why, happy that we have a full room. Make sure that you start doing this to make sure that the websites are running faster and your merchants basically make more money on the same code on the same instance. So it is possible to get below 200 milliseconds. This was like a proof of concept I've done. It was basically rewriting a lot of customized stuff, but this code is not production ready. But what I did here is I've basically using the composer replace, I'm removing all the modules that I don't use. Because as you know, composer on the code level, when Magento has 100,000, let's say 100,000 files, it creates the autoloader to load those files. So even if this is in the op cache and it's stored in the memory, it will still take some time to load this. So the less files you have, the faster Magento will be. So another tip from me, it's not on the slide, but hopefully you remember that. Once you are optimizing the composer autoload on production after the successful deployment, before using the composer autoload, remove the AV directory. It's a couple thousand files, and it does make a difference, like sometimes 50, sometimes 30 milliseconds. And the next tip I can give you, look at Colliger GitHub solution, because we released an open source plugin for MageRun, which is optimizing the way non-composer registration file works in your code. So again, getting a little technical, when Magento is based on composer, but you can put all your modules into app code, right? And that's basically how most of us do customization. Well, at least, let's say some of us. And the more thing you have there, the non-composer registration PHP file scans all the directories recursively just to look for the registration PHP file. So the more stuff you have in the app code and app design, the slower your non-composer registration will be. So check out our GitHub. If you are using MageRun, you can just plug it into your continuous delivery or CI deployment tools, and you will save 50 to 60 milliseconds on every page load, at least on a small, let's say on a medium-sized project. On the enterprise projects, we actually were able to save 120 milliseconds just by optimizing the composer load. And it's available open source, so happy to share. Like I said, it's on GitHub, so make sure to get it. So just to wrap it up, the backend stuff, start profiling to identify the bottlenecks. And unfortunately, there are some poorly coded extensions. There are some mostly come with the third-party teams, because the third-party teams, as you know, they are very good selling points for the merchants because I got so many customization options in the backend. Yeah, you do, but your website will load under 5 seconds, well, or above 5 seconds. But for the merchant point of view, a theme for 100 euros seems really interesting. Okay, how many minutes we have left?
We can start the Q&A session.
Really?
Yeah. You still?
All right, so let me just wrap it out really quickly with the front end. So regarding the front end optimization, it's basically optimizing JavaScript, CSS, and web images. And you need a fast checkout, but just to make sure that the things process. So for the front end, you just implement and check the core web vitals. And you should be focused on the performance, right? The free accessibility best practice and ES are quite easy to do, and Google Lighthouse will tell you what to do. For the performance, it's a challenge because with the Luma, there's not many options. So if your website is still based on the Luma theme, just use the MagePack. It's also another open source solution created by the community. For the long-term solution, you need to change your theme. Simple as that. And it can be Hoover, it can be Breeze, can be PWA, or maybe a customized solution that you build your own. So let me show you the numbers again. So let's just browse through them. This is the average numbers based on the merchants we work with in 2023 and 2024. So the performance optimized website sells more, it's cheaper to maintain, and it's basically faster and better, and it's easier to work with. Trust me, it's easier to work with. And I promised to you what the number, how much money we actually saved from the merchants, leading to the full store optimization. So what we did is a full backend optimization, Hoover theme migration, SEO optimization. We removed extensions which were no longer used. And we also, well, that's a huge part. We migrated to Magento open source from Adobe Cloud. So the question to you, and I'll wrap it up shortly. How much money you think we saved a year?
Million.
No, come on. It was not an enterprise project. It was like a large merchant. Below like 50 million revenue a year. So that's the number a year. A lot of that, half of that was actually Magento Adobe Commerce license, but the rest of it, the rest of it was actually hosting. The merchant was on really, really expensive hosting, 6,000 euros a month. And we reduced it to 300 euros. That's possible. So performance is not a nice to have, it's a must have feature. And I actually developed a free scan tool. It's called magescan.com, which will give you some basic information regarding the performance of your website. It's a free to use, and it will be a huge update coming in a couple of weeks. So make sure that you observe the link in profile. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Jakub. Use Q&A questions if you want. Huh?
So sorry for speeding up.
I can give something of my session.
Ah, you give
Follow-up session.
okay.
Can you go to the first slide, please? Yes. No, it's okay.
So we got 3 minutes for questions.
Anyone has questions?
Just don't ask me how much it costs for full optimize the store, because it depends.
Half of the savings.
I have a question.
I can hear you.
How did you make the migration from enterprise to open source? Did you just create a new open source, from scratch, and then migrate the data, or did you do some downgrade magic? Because the database structure is slightly different, right?
Yeah, so our method was basically we took the database and downgraded the Magento to open source, the database, so created like a migration scripts, and then built the store from scratch on the open source, having the database already intact.
Yeah, all right, gotcha.
But sometimes it's easier because some of the Adobe Commerce clients, actually, they don't use the content staging module because that's the biggest issue with the migration, because it changes the database structure with this like raw ID entity.
Exactly.
And don't let me start on performance of that module. you want it disabled.
Cool, thank you.
So any more questions?
I would actually have one. I need to wait for the mic.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
So the question would be, you mentioned that the more modules you have, or the more plugins you have, it increases loading time because of auto-loading, registering files,
Yes.
etc. Does it make sense if you have a lot of customization to not do it in like small atomic modules, but rather put a lot of customization into one module to circumvent that loading issue?
So there are 2 things here.
Classic, depends, I get it.
Yeah, it depends, but there are 2 things here. The first one is the number of the files which are loaded. So if you are using Composer, the less files, the better. But let's be honest, a customized module is usually, let's say, 15, let's say 20, 30 files, PHP files only. But the other thing is the non-composer registration, which affects the loading time much more than the optimized composer autoloader. So again, check our module on GitHub.
No more questions? No? Thank you very much.
Thank you again.